welcome back with your next class. In today's class, we'll be discussing pollinating agents related to cross-pollination. Okay? So, pollinating agents, these are the agents which will take up the pollen grains from one region to another in case we are talking about cross-pollination. Alright? Now, pollinating agents can be of various types, but we categorize them into two divisions. Abiotic agents means non-living, and biotic agents means living organisms. Okay? So abiotic agents are mainly two: anemophily, that is wind pollination, and hydrophily, that is water pollination. Alright? Whereas biotic agents can be again of various types like entomophily, means insect pollination, ornithophily, means bird pollination, chiropterophily, means bat pollination, malacophily, snail pollination, ophiophily, snake pollination, etc. Alright? So in our today's discussion, we'll be mainly discussing these three in details. Alright? Anemophily, hydrophily, and entomophily. Alright? So let's start with anemophily. Now, anemophily or wind pollination, it's very common, a process that is seen in various plants. Okay? Now, in anemophily, the plants or the flowers, they bear certain specific characteristics. Okay? So, by looking at the flower, you can say that what kind of pollinating agent it might have employed. Okay? So, there are a few characteristics of anemophilous flowers, like first, they are non-attractive, they are not beautiful, they will not bear any kind of bright colors, or they will not have any aroma or nectariferous glands, anything that can attract, only present in the flower. So they are non-attractive or inconspicuous. Okay? Next, the non-essential parts. Now all of you know, non-essential parts of the flower are calyx and corolla, or sepal and petal, isn't it? Non-essential parts are underdeveloped or absent. See, non-essential parts, like mostly the petal, it is meant for attracting the pollinating agents, isn't it? So here there is no as such thing that can be attracted. Wind of course cannot be attracted, right? So in that case, why should the plant invest so much of its resource or energy in bringing about development of the sepal or the petal? Why should it bear bright color or aroma, isn't it? That's why the non-essential parts, they are underdeveloped or sometimes even absent. Pollen grains are numerous. The pollen grains which are produced, they will be very huge in quantity. For example, a single male flower of cannabis can produce 5 lakh pollen grains. So that much of pollen grains in huge quantity, the flowers will have to bear. Now what is the reason behind such large amount of pollen grains? The reason is that, see, wind, it can take the pollen grains to any kind of direction, isn't it? There is no specific direction in which the pollen grains will be taken. So in that case, that makes fertilization a very chanced event. So it might happen, it might not happen. In that case, in such a situation, guaranteeing fertilization, pollen grains have to be produced in large quantity. So large quantity that the fertilization process can be ensured. Alright? So these pollen grains sometimes can be allergic as well. They may cause hay fever. Alright? Next. Feathery stigma. The stigma is the part of the carpel where the pollen grain will be received, isn't it? So in case of anemophilous flowers, the stigma is feathery, so that when the pollen grains will be brushing against it, maximum number of pollen grains can be entrapped in the stigma. That will increase the chances of fertilization. Nectarless. So these flowers, they would not bear nectariferous glands. Nectariferous glands are mostly borne by those flowers which would want to attract some living organism, isn't it? Like birds. They would rather come to a flower for gaining or for taking up the nectar, or bees. They can come up to a flower for taking up the nectar, right? But wind, there is no as such thing happening with wind, right? So nectariferous glands are absent, or the flowers are nectarless as well. Number 6 is presence of single ovule in each oval. Single ovule means a single egg, isn't it? So number of female gametes are going to be less in comparison to the number of male gametes. Number of male gametes will be huge in quantity. So in that case, that would rather ensure fertilization. Okay. So these are the main characteristics of anemophilous flowers. Now for important examples. The important examples for anemophily would be maize, sugarcane, bamboo, various types of grass, etc. Alright, so these are important examples. Now let us move on to the next one, that is hydrophily. So now let us discuss about hydrophily. Okay, hydrophily means water pollination. And first thing about hydrophily that you must know is that hydrophily is very uncommon or rarely found in nature. There are only around 30 genera of plants that exhibit hydrophily. Okay, so you might be thinking, then what happens to most of the aquatic plants? Most aquatic plants will either bear their flower above or on top of the surface of water. That's how they can employ both wind pollination also and insect pollination also. Alright, so water pollination is very rare and is only found in 30 genera of plants, and most of the plants are monocots. Okay, so before we discuss further in details about hydrophily or the types of hydrophily, you must first know that what are the characteristics of a hydrophilous flower. Okay, first thing, they're unweightable in nature. Next, unweightable, light pollen grains, due to mucilaginous coat. Alright. Stigma is also unweightable. So mainly it's unweightable, that's mostly seen in the flower. The structure of the flower is going to be formed in a manner that it would be completely covered by a mucilaginous cover or a coat, due to which the nature of the flower itself will become unweightable, something that does not get wet. Okay. So keeping in mind this, next thing that we should learn is about types of hydrophily. There are two types of hydrophily according to where exactly the pollination is occurring, whether it's occurring above the surface of water or it's happening below the surface of water. Okay, so let's see that. First, epihydrophily. Epi means above. So here the pollination will be occurring above the surface of water. Alright. So example I will be taking is Vallisneria. Okay. So Vallisneria is a dioecious plant. That means it will bear male and female flowers in separate plant bodies. Okay. So this is how it would look like. It has narrow, long leaves. The narrow, long leaves are usually found in aquatic plants because they can easily withstand the water current and they do not tear off. Alright, that's why they are going to be narrow and long. Now because Vallisneria is a dioecious plant, suppose this is the male plant, this is the female plant. Okay? This is the surface of water. In case of the male plant, the flower is going to possess 3 tepals. Okay? It's going to be like this. And it will bear 2 fertile stamens. 2 stamens, 3 tepals. Okay? On the other hand, the female flower will be having a tendrilar stalk. Tendrilar stalk. Okay? So it will be possessing a stalk that can coil around, so that by uncoiling it can bring the flower on the top. That means on the surface of water. Alright? So see what would happen. As the male flowers will mature, that means the pollen grains inside the anther are fully ready. Okay? At that time, automatically the male flowers will be released from the body of the plant. It will get detached from the body of the plant, and as it gets detached from the body of the plant, the flower, being light in weight, it will directly go up and it will start floating on top of the water. Okay, on the surface of the water. How it will be floating? See, while it floats, 2 of its tepals will behave as boat and one of its sepal will behave as sail. That's how it will balance and it will start moving in water. So as soon as the male flower reaches out towards the female flower, as it comes in contact with the female flower, the anthers would burst, releasing the pollen grains, and hence as the pollen grains are released, of course, fertilization or pollination will take place. Once fertilization is successfully done, this tendrilar stalk of the female flower, it will start to coil up again. As it coils up again, what will happen? The female flower, it will be brought back inside, it will be pulled back inside the water. As it is pulled back inside the water, now the zygote or the developing embryo will be protected from external agencies. Inside the water, it will be much more well protected, and that's how a new offspring or the progeny can be formed. Alright, so here what you have seen in Vallisneria is that in Vallisneria, even if the plants are submerged inside the water, the pollination will be occurring above the surface of water. So because pollination is happening above the surface of water, that's why we call it epihydrophily. Now let us take an example of the hypohydrophily as well. That means the pollination occurring below the surface of water. Alright. So for hypohydrophily, I am going to take the example of Zostera marina. Zostera marina. Okay. So for Zostera marina, it's a marine species. As it is suggested in the name itself, this one is a marine species. Alright. So here the female flower will remain submerged inside the water itself, and the pollen grains, they are ribbon-like and long. Okay. So the female flower, suppose this is the plant. And this is the female flower that is born. Now, the pollen grains, they are going to have ribbon-like appearance. They are long and ribbon-like with pointed tip. Another thing about the pollen grain here is that the pollen grains, they have the specific gravity exactly like water. That means they are neither light, that they will remain afloat in water, nor are they heavy, that they will sediment in water. So they can passively move along with water. So they will move inside the water, and once they come nearby to the female flower, they can coil around the stigma, because finally the female flower, which is also going to have a very long stigma, that long stigma will also keep on swaying in water, keep on moving in water. So likewise, as soon as the pollen grain comes in contact with that long stigma, it will coil around, and then by the help of its tip, it will enter inside and cause fertilization. Alright. So here the entire method of pollination is occurring below the surface of water. So we call it hypohydrophily. Is that clear? So that is regarding water pollination as well. Next is entomophily. Entomophily means insect pollination. Okay. Now there are so many different types of insects that can act as pollinating agents, starting with bees, to butterflies, to wasps, to moth, to beetle, to flies, etc. So many. Beetles are known to be the earliest insect pollinator. Okay. So now in entomophily, there are certain, again, characteristics which has to be present in the flower so that they can be employing entomophily successfully. So let us see the characteristics. Characteristics of entomophilous flower. First, I think all of you can guess already, because it's insects and they have to be attractive. So that's why flowers are very beautiful. Flowers are large showy and attractive. They will attract. Now how will they attract? They are very colorful. So brightly colored, they have specific aroma. I am talking here about specific aroma. I didn't tell beautiful aroma. Why? Because see, there are certain flowers which might not smell very beautiful. They might rather be just the opposite. That means they might smell very foul as well. Why? Because flies and beetles, these kind of insects, they will be attracted to only those places which have rotting or which are undergoing some decomposition process, isn't it? Which have rotting smells, etc. So those plants which wants to employ beetles or flies for pollination, they cannot be smelling beautiful. Rather, they have to have a very foul odor. Only then it's possible for the flowers to attract such agents. So that's why I'm telling specific aroma. Alright? Yeah, most flowers will be smelling beautiful, but then exceptions exist. Okay? Nectaries present. So the flowers can bear nectars as well. The nectar is actually a type of gift or a present that's given to the insect pollinator by the plant, okay, in return for pollination. Okay. If you remember, during microsporogenesis, we have talked about something called pollen kit secreted by the secretory tapetum. Now pollen kit is something that is a yellowish color sticky fluid that will be present on the surface of the pollen grain for entomophilous flowers. Why? Because that will make the pollen grain sticky, and because of that they can stick onto the body of the insects and can be dispersed to a longer distance. Okay? In case the flowers are small, they will be packed into inflorescence. Flowers, when small, are packed into inflorescence. Alright? So that if the flower is small, it will not be very attractive or showy, right? So that's why all the flowers will be then born in a cluster that can give a showy appearance, alright? That can attract the insects. This being the characteristics of entomophilous flowers, let us talk some spatial kind of plant-insect interactions that are very important for you to know. Like, important plant insect. First, yucca plant and Pranuba moth. Yucca plant and Pranuba moth, it's a very important association. The yucca plant, it bears a large size flower inside which the Pranuba moth lays its eggs. Okay? Now, it is actually a very safe place to lay the eggs, because only when the eggs will be laid in a safe place or a protected area, only then they can hatch successfully and give rise to progeny, isn't it? So that's why Pranuba moth, it always will go inside the flower of the yucca plant and then lay its eggs. In return, while after laying the eggs, while it is coming out of the flower, this female moth, it will be causing pollination. Okay, it will be taking the pollen grains and it will be keeping it or transferring it on the stigma of the carpel. Fine. That's how, while the Pranuba moth is getting a safe place to lay its eggs, it is also acting as the pollinator to the plant. Fine. So now, when this process has been continued for so long, the Pranuba moth and yucca plant, they have become or they have co-evolved in a manner that they cannot complete their life cycle without each other. The Pranuba moth cannot lay its eggs without the yucca plant, and the yucca plant cannot get pollinated without the Pranuba moth. Fine? So that's why they are an example of co-extinction as well. That means one, if goes extinct, the other one being so much dependent will also go extinct. Okay? So that's why it's a very important association. It's an example of co-evolution and co-extinction. If one evolves, means changes, the other one will also have to evolve. If one goes extinct, the other one will also go extinct. Fine? Second important association is an example of Ophrys speculum and Colpa aureus. Ophrys speculum is the orchid and Colpa aureus is the wasp. See, Colpa aureus, the wasp, as it lays its eggs, the male eggs will hatch faster than the female. So the males will be available in the surrounding and will go in search for the female. Fine? But the female eggs being hatching later, the females won't be available in the surrounding. Taking an advantage of this situation, this orchid, Ophrys speculum, it will bear its flowers which will be exactly alike in looks, in appearance. The flower of this orchid will be exactly like the female wasp. So the male wasp will mistaken the flowers to be the female, and while it pseudocopulates with the flower, there will be pollination occurring. Alright? So this is an example for sexual deceit. Alright? The flowers of this orchid will look exactly like the female wasp, and that's why the male wasp will pseudocopulate with the flower, and hence pollination will take place. Alright? The third important thing that you should know is called pollen or nectar robbers. Pollen or nectar robbers are those kind of insects that will take up the nectar, or they will feed upon edible pollen grains but not cause pollination. So they will take the gifts but they will not do the work in return. Okay? They will take up the pollen grains, they will take up the edible pollen grains, they will take up the nectar but they will not cause any pollination. That's why they are called pollen or nectar robbers. Okay? Example is important, that is Bombus affinis, the insect. It will be perforating the flower of Aquilegia spurs. Queen of. Example is Queen of Bombus affinis, which will be perforating the flower of Aquilegia spurs and taking the nectar and the pollen but will not cause any kind of pollination. So these being the three important facts regarding insect pollination as well. So with that, pollination is done with. So we have discussed the types of pollination, inbreeding and outbreeding devices, and here in this class we have discussed about the various types of pollinating agents. So with that pollination being done, in the next class we'll discuss about pollen-pistil interaction. Thank you.